Good morning, everyone. Today is December 18th, 2020. My name is Brian Horning. I'm the CEO of Exact IT Solutions. Welcome to our YouTube channel where we discuss all things cybersecurity and tech, but mainly cybersecurity. Today we're going to talk about some things around the SolarWinds, Microsoft, FireEye, U.S. government, Russian cyber attack, mainly a blog post that was posted by Microsoft's president Brad Smith yesterday evening that talks about the need for a strong global cybersecurity response. The reason I wanted to talk about this video or this blog post and where we're at today with this whole entire hack is because this is the first time we've heard a major player, the president of one of the largest companies in the world, come out and say that there has to be a response. And let's look at what he's kind of talking about in this video. But before I jump into that content, please remember that we are not getting paid for this channel. We don't do sponsorships. We don't ask you to support us on Patreon or anything like that. We do this because we believe that the world needs to become more educated around the threats that are out there today, which I'm going to, probably educate you a lot about some different threats based on this blog post right here. So if you do learn anything on my channel, or you're entertained or you're enlightened in any way, shape, or form, I ask that you would just hit the like button. That's the only fee I'm requesting of you at this time. And if you like our content, maybe you'd consider subscribing to our channel and hit the alert button you'll get notified by YouTube when we post a new video. So without further ado, let's jump into today's content. All right, so as I mentioned at the top of the video, there was a blog post released last night by Brad Smith, who is the president of Microsoft. And as you probably have heard, Microsoft has been a victim of the SolarWinds attack. I guess we'll dub it that. It started off this time last week with the FireEye reported attack. And then that evolved over the weekend to the United States government saying they had entities that were victims of this SolarWinds attack, which allowed these criminal hackers to then get access to these government entities. Fast forward to last night, Thursday night, we heard reports of over 25 to 30 different government agencies, including the people responsible for your taxes, for your nuclear weapons, for your own military. The Department of Defense has released indications that they believe that they may have had systems and or departments within the DoD that use this software that may have been compromised. And now we have Microsoft coming out and saying that they use this software, and because they implemented it, this also affected their about 40 of their organizations that they do business with. When I did the first video on this last week, and I did a follow-up video earlier this week, I alluded to all this stuff. I alluded to that there's going to be a massive number of companies and organizations that are going to have to report this. And I also alluded to a lot of the things that Brad mentions in his blog post, that we need to do a better job and view this as a team sport and work together to make this a less attractive option for people to try to further their agenda, further their governments in the case of state-sponsored attacks. And then in the case of people who just want to make money, make it less attractive for them to make money. I don't really have the answers to how we go about doing this. I have some opinions on how I think you should handle state-sponsored governments that are actively trying to hack at this level. And I'm just going to go out there and say that this, to me, is an act of war. There's no difference just because this is on a digital playing field. There's no difference than if you walked in the building of the Department of Defense or the U.S. Treasury and just started ripping open file cabinets and looking at all that stuff. I mean, what do you think would happen if individuals walked through the front door of our government buildings and started going through people's desks and drawers and file cabinets and things like that? There's no difference, just because it's on a digital platform, there's no difference, in my opinion, between doing that and doing what just happened here. The internet just made it easier for people to you don't have to physically invade a country anymore. Let me say it again. You no longer have to physically invade a country anymore to be invaded. And I don't want to talk war, and I don't want to fearmonger and things like that, but that's the reality. People have been conditioned to look at war as, planes and tanks and ships, rolling up on the shore, and soldiers getting out with weapons in their hands and running on shore and fighting. And that has changed. The battlefield is now digital. You don't see it. In the same sense that you really don't need to jump on a plane to go travel somewhere to have a business meeting or to meet with your family and friends. You can do this all over the internet now. You no longer have to send a letter to somebody halfway around the world to communicate with them and wait weeks for them to get your message. When you have the internet and you have things like Facebook and email where you could just message somebody and they receive it in less than a minute, they have your message. We live in a totally different time, and we need to change our perspective and become smarter about what the heck is going on out here, because I don't see any difference between what's going on with all these hacks and the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor. I really just don't. It's more cinematic and more dramatic because it plays out in front of your eyes, and there's all these bombs and explosions and people dying and things like that going on. Well, with this stuff, all the same stuff's happening. You just don't see it. People are dying because of cyber attacks. God knows what's going to happen because of all these government entities that were compromised, and the information that was obtained when these supposed Russian hackers got access to all these different networks and all these different email accounts. They had a treasure trove of companies and government organizations at their fingertips, and they got to pick and choose who and what they did within each organization, and who they looked at and what emails they looked at. They had their pickings. And they had a ton of options to choose from in the process. So, you have to really take a step back and look at this from the perspective of who was behind this and what were their objectives in doing so. What purpose does it serve them? And if, quite frankly, I'm going to educate you on some things right here. If this was to be found to be Russian state-sponsored hackers, Americans should really educate themselves on things like geopolitical warfare and things like that, and the Foundations of Geopolitics, which is a book, is basically a manual that was written and adopted by members of the KGB who have since rose in political power in the country of Russia. You start to connect the dots here of what's being done not only with these hacks, with social media, if you take a look at some of the Russian space programs and what they're what they're aiming to achieve with those programs. And you start to connect the dots with all these things, and it brings you to the conclusion that Russia is becoming a serious threat with all of this stuff. And it's very concerning because they're putting all the pieces in place to basically fulfill what's in the book that I mentioned, which is called The Foundations of Geopolitics. Now, I don't want to go on a rant about that. I have certain beliefs around that I, quite frankly, hold strongly. But I wouldn't recommend that you read the book, but go look up what the book is and what it means. There's Wikipedia articles about it. You can learn basically the Cliff Notes version of what it is and what it means. I would actually be relieved if I heard this wasn't Russia. But the fact that it is Russia and everybody, including Microsoft, is saying it was Russia, it doesn't leave a good feeling in myself that all these things are being achieved by Russian state hackers, because quite frankly, when I talk about ransomware and the people behind most of the successful and highly paid out ransomware attacks are Russian speaking groups. As I've said on my channels before and in my videos, I believe the cyber criminals are winning the war. I believe this is a war. How we choose to fight it, that's obviously up to our leaders and us as a country. But Brad here in this article does make a lot of good and well thought out points, and I figured I would kind of highlight them for you today. I talked about a lot of the things in the beginning of this article that Brad talks about in my comments here. I just wanted to show everyone this map really fast. What this map is a heat map of the activity of this map represents the number of Orion installations that Microsoft detected after this all came out. So when they knew what the signature file was of the Orion software, and they put that into their Microsoft Defender antivirus database, they were able to generate this heat map to see where all these installations were. Now you can see there's a lot of purple worldwide. Obviously in the United States, you see a heck of a lot in certain areas of the country, the Northeast, the Midwest, the Southeast, and actually you see a big spot there in Texas, which is not surprising being that SolarWinds was based in Austin, Texas. You also see a lot of purple around the rest of the world and some other parts of the country. And that's where, obviously the biggest blob that you see on the map is right smack dab in the middle of our country, or in the middle of the Northeast, or the capital of our country, and the areas surrounding it. And, anybody that knows anything about the geography of the United States and what's in that area, you're talking, a lot of government and a lot of government contracting companies that are in the Maryland and Virginia areas that surround Washington, D.C. So moving on, Brad goes in and talks about, who's being attacked, and 44% of the attacks are happening to information technology companies. And the reality is that, he goes on to highlight here, all this is changing because of a second evolving threat, namely the growing privatization of cybersecurity attacks through a new generation of private companies akin to 21st century mercenaries. So mercenaries obviously were people that fought wars as kind of like, contractors. And that's exactly what's going on here. And Brad goes on and talks about a company out in Israel who built an app and sold it to other governments. And basically what their app did is this company discovered a vulnerability in the app called WhatsApp, which is dubs itself as a messaging app where you can send messages securely encrypted back and forth to one another. And they built an app called Pegasus. And the reason they built this app was because they found an exploit within WhatsApp that allowed a user to send a message to another WhatsApp user, and nothing else had to happen. And once that happened, and the app Pegasus, all you would have to do is install it on your phone, and then all you would have to do is use that app to call another WhatsApp user, and they didn't even have to answer. And then you would have control over that individual's phone, and you'd be able to do things like read messages and things like that. And nobody would have any idea it was on there. The person who was infected did not have to install anything at all. They just had to receive a phone call on their WhatsApp from anybody who had this Pegasus software. And it's been reported, and they're the company that built this is in Israel, and they are in litigation right now, but they are accused of having their software being able to spy on journalists and human rights activists, and a lot of other people that had this WhatsApp installed, and just by receiving a phone call from somebody with the Pegasus app, they were able to then spy on their phone, so to speak. And then that's essentially a reoccurring theme that we're going to be seeing, is the companies that are out there that are just finding vulnerabilities, and instead of responsibly reporting them to vendors, these companies are just making their own companies to exploit these vulnerabilities. And that's a emerging threat that we're going to have to deal with in the very near future. The wheels are already in motion for a lot of these things to happen, and these companies to make money around doing things like this. And it's only a matter of time before it becomes even more prevalent, as Brad points out. And then there's a third and final sobering development worth noting from what has obviously been a challenge this year, and this comes from the intersection between cyber attacks and COVID-19 itself. That's pretty self-explanatory. I've talked about that on this channel a million times, how cyber attacks and COVID-19 and how hackers are going to use COVID-19 to try to make money, not only from tricking people with COVID-19 type information, but also going after the supply chain of the COVID-19 drug manufacturers and things like that. So Brad goes on to suggest a more effective strategy as we enter 2021. And the first thing he highlights is that, simply put, we need to more effective national and global strategy to protect against cyber attacks. And he goes into speaking about everybody working together as a global coalition to stop these cyber attacks. And obviously that means a lot of things. That means countries working together to sanction countries that they deem that are participating in this type of activity. It will mean, sanctions in terms of dollars, sanctions in terms of trade, and then they'll also maybe try to fine or hit bank accounts for some of these companies or people that they believe are behind all of this. It's also working together to share information on what we know about certain things, and come to an agreement on what really acceptable and fair behavior looks like. We already have that, with things like war, and when you negotiate peace and trade deals, there's language that specifies what's acceptable behavior and what's not acceptable behavior. Because quite frankly, you're not going to stop countries from spying on one another. You're not going to stop countries from trying to do things like what's being done today. But from what I understand, in just the intelligence community in general, there are certain rules of engagement that they play by, even though they know this spying is going on. There's certain lines that are drawn around certain things, and that is basically what needs to be spelled out here, I suppose. I'm probably for a more aggressive measure than that, but that's what this kind of article talks about here. And then he says we need to take major steps forward in sharing and analysis of intelligence threat, which I already mentioned. Obviously, if you were around during the 9/11 Commission, that was one of the things that came out, and Brad mentions that in this article, is that our own government wasn't sharing information with one another well enough, and a lot of that has changed in the 20 years or so since that attack. And that's what he's suggesting here. And then second, he goes on to say that we need to strengthen international rules to put reckless nation-state behaviors out of bounds and ensure that domestic laws thwart the rise of cyber attack ecosystem. Right. So, you can put laws in the books. You could try to do this diplomatically for sure. You can. Israel, the example I gave earlier with the company that built the app, Israel could come down harder on companies that try to build things like that, and the United States should obviously have laws on the books that state that if you're going to build tools that are going to be used for cyber attacks, there are certain higher penalties that are going to be associated with that when you get caught, and then also making sure that we're all on board collectively as a group of nations to put the things in place that are going to deter this type of behavior. Absolutely. We saw this a lot under Obama's administration, where he would put a lot of regulations on countries. And I just kind of think that with Biden coming in, we're going to see a lot of that happening, with similar to how Obama handled a lot of this stuff. He liked to ratchet things up with sanctions and getting other countries on board before he talked about things like taking more aggressive type of actions. So it'll be interesting where this all goes. And Brad wraps it all up here and says that we need stronger steps to hold nation states accountable for cyber attacks. So, I kind of read that, and I read through what he suggests here, and it's obviously very diplomatic. But, it begs the question in my mind that when do you respond with diplomacy? Do you respond with more digital type attacks on the country you think is the one causing the problem? Those two have been our typical response in the past. I kind of wonder when there's going to be that crossover between a digital attack and an actual physical attack on a country. It is yet to happen. We tend to take these digital attacks as kind of the trade-off for having technology, that we have to expect these kinds of things. But there's going to be a point in time where human beings are going to just say enough is enough, and we're not going to deal with this through a hack attempt on them, or we're not going to shut down their servers. We're going to fly planes over their country, and we're going to show them that we mean business. And I'm not saying that's what we should do, but I'm saying that that's obviously, if you get a particular leader who believes that all these other measures are not working, and we need to show them we mean business. We would hope that things would never come to that. And then the other thing that I look at is that Russia, or the people that are being blamed for this, I look at that as they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. And yeah, they had their hands in a lot of cookie jars, but we don't know exactly what our countries are doing and our allies' countries are doing in terms of this type of stuff. It would be naive of me to sit here and say that America doesn't engage in these types of things, but that is not true. We know from when Edward Snowden revealed what he revealed, that there is a large spying program in this country, and it's kind of like the people in the know, the politicians, the people that know what's going on, how far are they willing to push back against this type of behavior when they know that we're engaged in, similar types of behavior? The reality of it is that Americans could have people doing the same exact thing on other countries' computers. It begs the question that if we're not taking severe action against these people, do we have something that we need to be worried about? Do we have skeletons in our closet that we need to be concerned with? And that's why we're not willing to take the steps needed to stop this stuff. To me, I think, there's a lot of things we can do better, and why we're not doing them better today, I really don't know. But this kind of attack and these types of things are things that are happening, and they are things that people need to take awareness around and understand that these have bigger implications than just somebody breaking into a network and stealing information. I hope that this video and my opinions today really helped you kind of see some things in a different light. I really don't like to get too opinionated on this channel, but I do have a lot of knowledge and time invested in researching a lot of this stuff. And I do believe that the Russians do want to further an agenda that they have, and every time I keep seeing their country mentioned in these attacks, it only leads me further to believe that what I've read in the Foundations of Geopolitics is really something that they really want to achieve. And if you read what's in there, you should be concerned if you are an American citizen who loves this country like I do. So that's it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the content. Please drop some comments below if you like anything I said here today, or you agree or disagree with me. That's what makes this country great, is that we can have these opinions, we can share them, and we can have a good debate about how we move forward and deal with these threats. We can't do this alone. We need to do this collectively as a country and as a nation. So I look forward to seeing everybody's comments and your opinions. Thanks for all your support. We'll see you next week.